Opening, 5-minute opening.
So it was a little over 2 years ago that many of you prompted me to leave the marketplace, solely the marketplace, and to run for office. And over a lot of prayer and consideration with my wife and family, I agreed to do it. And there was a lot of intrepidation leading up to January 8th when I was sworn in, which was just 2 days ago. It was 1 year anniversary when I was sworn in, as to what kind of pressure would I see in Austin, and would I be strong enough to not go along or get along to go along. You hear stories about people that that claim to be the second coming of Ronald Reagan. Everyone in that house promises that they're conservative, and everyone throws that word around pretty easily. And there were a lot of people there that I really respected and that I was very disappointed with. And so how would I stand up? And well, we're at the end of the first session, and I got one of the top scores, Young Conservatives of Texas. In fact, they rate us on 60 different votes. And I was in the top 5 of 181 legislators. That's 150 House members and 31 senators. And I was in the top 5. And I feel like I did well. I did what I promised I would do. I drew a line in the sand and I held it. And I thank you for the opportunity that you guys gave me to serve you and represent you.
Okay. Thank you. Larry, kick it off.
Along that line, you've served one term in the House. What are the differences? Well, let me. What are you're wanting to run for Senate? Why are you running for Senate? And what is the benefit of being a senator versus being a House of Representatives rep, and in the standpoint of getting things done?
We have an opportunity that we have an opportunity in the Senate that we haven't had in years. The House is several years away from being a truly conservative body. We're making inroads, and I think we'll make some inroads this year. That there are 2 great people that in House District 15 and 16, my seat is House District 15, that will backfill my position in a position that's opening up in Conroe, and they'll be great additions. But we want to make sure too that we fill this position in Senate District 4. Right now we have the opportunity of picking that seat up. We have the opportunity of picking up Senate District 10, which is Winnie Davis's seat, will be picked up, we hope, by Connie Burton, and a couple other seats. And it's Van Taylor's an example, will be going in there. And Van and I, we're kind of the fire breathers in the House. And if we bring that to the Senate, you know, it's one thing when you're a fire breather and you're one of 150, but when you're one of 31, you can really get something done. And you look at a lot of the conservative groups around the state of Texas, and they see this as an incredible opportunity. For the very simple reason that in the Senate, you're only one of 31. And so it's not enough to just call yourself conservative. They want advocates in the Senate. And that's what I'm seeing. Tim Lambert of the Texas Homeschool Coalition, that was what he said. He said, Steve, he said, we're not looking for someone that calls himself conservative. We want someone that's an advocate, someone that's really going to push the ball forward. And that's you. That's what you did in the House. We're confident you'll do that in the Senate.
Okay.
All right. Transportation is a big issue in the state. We have not only one of the fastest growing states, one of the best economies, but we also have the oil and gas industry moving forward right now. And they're finding the roads are crumbling underneath them. So what can you do as a state senator to try to address that problem?
Mobility is a huge issue. It's especially a huge issue for Montgomery County because it's the second fastest growing county in the state. So, and it's not just the oil and gas thing. It's the big issue that corporations have before they come here. More important than tax abatements, more important than education is, can my employees get to and from work in the morning? Or is it going to take them an hour and a half in snarled traffic to do that? Texas needs to be disciplined about getting back to the things that the Texas Constitution calls us to. And mobility and transportation is one of those things. It's one of the 4 things, really, that the Constitution calls us to. And if we said no to feral hog abatement programs and Commission for the Arts and Grape Growers Association and a half dozen, or actually to 10 dozen other special interest group cartels that are holding the state hostage, then we can do that. We don't have to take money out of the rainy day fund to do it. Coming into the 83rd legislative session, the Legislative Budget Board and the Comptroller said we had $8.8 billion of unspent money from the 82nd legislative session. So we started out $8.8 billion ahead with a projection, a near record, a record amount of money coming in by the state. We spent all $8.8 billion plus a record amount, and then and only then did we take $4 billion out of the rainy day fund for roads and water. That was criminal. How many of you? I mean, most of you guys are small business people. How many of you, if you're a small business person, how many of you would say we're going to take care of our needs last and our wants first? You take care of your needs first because you don't have an unlimited amount of cash. The state tends to think of taking care of needs last so they can take those out of the rainy day fund and cripple it. It's criminal. It's foolish.
Okay, one of the things that has been a key issue with a lot of people has to do with federal overreach. And you indicated that you are in favor of stopping that. That's one of your top 3 priorities. In a past legislature, there was a bill brought forth when the TSA came down with those overly aggressive rules to ban those rules from being applied in Texas. And it was squelched. What is the realistic probability that you can do things to stop that federal overreach if you can't even get something like the TSA bill passed?
With current House leadership, there is no chance. I'm just going to be blunt with you.
My understanding is that one died in the Senate.
With the current House leadership, it's not going to happen. Dale, I'm just... it's just not going to happen. I mean,
Okay.
There are two things that hamper state sovereignty, and one of them is the federal government wanting to come in and control us and tell us what to do. Obamacare, and you can name 10 or 15 other things, gun control, right, on and on and on. But in my mind, here's the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that there are 200 funding sources that come into the state of Texas, 200 different grant streams that come into the state of Texas from the federal government. People say, we're not getting our fair share. You've heard that before, right? For every dollar that goes to the federal government, we're getting less than that back. It's not true. It's absolutely not true. For every dollar that we send in income tax to the federal government, we get $1.35 back. What is the deficit? It's 35% right now. The deficit is the grants, that money that's coming back to the states. And the federal government loves this transaction because they send us money and we send them liberty. They send us grant money, we send them, and we accept their rules and regulations. And we lose a little bit of our liberty every time this happens. And so, if the states really truly want to be in a situation where our state government really wants to protect, defend our state liberties, then we've got to be in a position where we're willing to say no to the federal government's money.
Brian?
So in your questionnaire, you indicated your 3 priorities would be the overreach of the federal government, transparency in local and state government, and parental control for their family for the family and in the classroom. You expounded on that a little further on the example you did with your Firearm Protection Act bill. What did that act do in relation to stopping federal overreach? And what are the chances of that getting passed in the future?
That bill passed out of the House with a supermajority, and I worked hard on that bill. I worked hard to get it through committee. It finally got a hearing in committee, and it was nearly every day that I was going to the committee chair saying, when is it going to get a vote, when is it going to get a vote? And I went to each and every individual member of that committee and polled the committee members, and we had the votes to get it out, but it just did not get a vote early enough. It finally got out, went to calendars. They tried to kill it in calendars, and I worked hard to get it through calendars. Finally made it to the floor, but it didn't come out early enough. Now, it wasn't just that bill. There were, I think, 8 gun bills that made it to the floor, and it never came out until early May. So the Speaker made sure that when these gun bills were let out of calendars, they came out late enough so they never stood a chance of making it through the Senate. Again, this goes back to...
So what did the bill actually do?
What the bill did was it pushes back on the federal government, and it basically makes it a Class B misdemeanor for a police officer to infringe on your Second Amendment rights that work in concert with any time, whether it's an executive order or congressional order at the federal level, to infringe on our Second Amendment rights. I mean, the Second Amendment is really clear: shall not be infringed with the last 4 words. Shall not be infringed. The Constitution is always supreme. And there are too many people that think an executive order is part of the Supremacy Clause. It's not. The Supremacy Clause is only supreme when it's consistent with the Constitution.
Okay. What do you see as the major differences between you and your opponents, 2 or 3, in this race?
In this race, and again, I'll go back to what Texas Right to Life and Texas Homeschool Coalition and other groups have said of me and why they've endorsed me. In fact, nearly every conservative group in the state of Texas has come out and endorsed my campaign for Senate District 4. Every single statewide, every single House member, every single Senate member that has run for the Republican Party ticket calls themselves a conservative. It is the most abused and overused word in the English lexicon in Austin. A conservative isn't known for and defined by what they say. They're defined by what they do. And I have gained a reputation in the Texas House as being a fighter, unwilling to go along with current leadership. I've just been unwilling to do it. I've never picked up a committee chairmanship. There are 3 committees that every House member would love to be on. One is appropriations, one is calendars, appropriations, calendars, and the third one is redistricting. Those 3 committees are the most coveted committees because they're the ones that you've got to have ultimate trust, the ultimate trust of the Speaker of the House. One of my opponents has been on all 3 of those committees and has been appointed by Joe Strauss to be on those committees, and is a chairman as well. I will not trade. I will not do a quid pro quo for leadership and abdicate my responsibility to represent the people of House District 15 or Senate District 4.
All right, thanks.
In one of our questions, fully describe what methods of funding roads in Texas you would support and oppose, and give your reasonings. And you basically said you like the pay-as-you-go system. Elaborate a little bit on that, a little more detail.
First off, county debt is one of the biggest problems that Texas has right now. And in fact, while we don't have any debt at the federal level, it's all held at the county level. If you look at Texas debt on a per capita basis, the only state that has more debt than us is New York. That's it. New York State. On a total debt, we're ranked number 3 behind New York and California. And it's mostly held at the county level. The vast majority of that debt is road debt. In fact, Texas has the most road debt of any state in the union. And we're not pay-as-you-go. Granted, we're growing faster than any state right now, but at the same time, too, when you're servicing so much debt currently, that's money that you can't use to build roads. Some of the mistakes that county governments have made is that rather than, let me back up a second. I'm going to just go back to what we started talking about earlier, which is the surplus that we have. If we held government and the growth of government to the 4 foundational elements that we're called to under the Constitution, we'd have all the money I think that we need for roads. And that's the biggest problem right now, is we're not paying for roads and mobility with GR money. We're also not paying for it out of the dedicated money that comes from the gas tax. If we used all the money from the gas tax, if we used all the money from vehicle registration fees, then we wouldn't be in the bind that we're in right now. So we've got plenty of revenue coming into Texas. We don't need new forms of revenue streams. It's not necessary. We've got all the money that we need. And last year's budget was witness of that. We grew the budget 24% in one session. The Wall Street Journal said that we went Sacramento. Said Texas goes Sacramento. We had all the money that we needed to take care of roads.
Germany has recently requested a return of their gold from the Fed. And the first year of this, the Fed has decided, well, we're going to phase it out over multiple years, given 10% over the year 2013. It just came out this week that what the Fed delivered back to Germany was not the gold that Germany deposited with them. It did not include the Bundesbank symbol on the gold bars. The Fed is saying that they just had to remelt it and send it back to them. But pretty much everyone in the community says there's absolutely no reason that they would have done that this likely was not their gold, which implies that the Fed doesn't have the gold. So that, coupled with trillions of dollars of spending at the federal level being borrowed, and trillions of dollars of printing money by the Fed, do you think there's an upcoming collapse of the financial system? And if so, what does Texas need to do to respond to that?
Given what's going on, these really are truly unprecedented times that we live in, because you've got two things going on that make it nearly impossible to predict what will happen. One is we're printing money left and right with these ridiculous deficits. And the second is quantitative easing. And quantitative easing is just pouring money into the market to inflate it. And if quantitative easing weren't in there, would the economy have already collapsed? Your guess is as good as mine. One thing that you can be rest assured of is that by inflating the dollar right now, and it's through fractional banking, there will be hyperinflation. It's unavoidable. You can go back through the history of any economy. When you print money the way we are right now, we have a $17 trillion budget deficit, and that doesn't even include what's off the books is the quantitative easing. That's not part of that number. It's 17 trillion plus. And so all that money that's going into the economy right now is absolutely that is going to come back to bite us hard. So what should we be doing about it? I think Texas needs to do a couple things. Number one, we need to get our gold back. Number one. Number two, I think Texas needs its own bank. North Dakota has its own bank. They have a state bank. It's not a bank for individuals to be part of. It's a banker's bank. So if you look at North Dakota's economy right now is exploding. One of the reasons why it's exploding beyond oil is that there is a banker's bank that small banks have the ability to go to this bank, borrow money from it. North Dakota keeps its rainy day fund in that account, in that bank, and then all the state agencies keep their money in that bank, and then they can loan that to local banks who can then make loans to small business and entrepreneurs. In the event when this comes home to roost, all the fractional banking and injecting money into the economy, I think Texas is going to feel this, absolutely. We're absolutely going to feel it, but I think we stand a much better chance of getting through it. Number one, if our gold comes back home, and number two, we have a Texas bank.
Okay, in one of our questions having to do with special purpose districts, you stated that the people who are impacted by the tax must be allowed to participate in the vote. I'm not sure exactly what you envision with that or how you intend to accomplish it. Could you give us a little bit more insight into what you were saying when you wrote that?
If you gerrymander a district so that the people impacted by the tax don't have the opportunity to vote, it's wrong.
Okay,
Our founding fathers said taxation without representation was wrong. That was one of the things that i.e. the Stamp Act, that caused a revolution. So take, I think it's the Westwoods 2978, 1488. Are you familiar with that area? They gerrymandered that to a small area and they lost. They gerrymandered it to a smaller area and they lost. They gerrymandered it to one house in an apartment building and finally won by 1 or 2 votes. That's ridiculous. That's not a representative form of governance, and that's wrong. And so the law under which MUDs and RUDs operate has to change.
okay, and are there reasonable ways that you can put restrictions to make sure that there's representation as you envision?
If a geographic area, like that area at Westwoods 2978 and 1488, if it impacts a geographic area, everyone that lives within that geographic area should be able to participate in the vote.
Okay, but then what you said is they kept narrowing it down. They still had a geographic area.
The geographic area that the tax impacted stayed the same. The number of voters shifted from an apartment building to one house of who could participate in the vote.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Sorry.
Are you gonna introduce, we got a little bit of time left for that, are you gonna introduce any kind of legislation that would stop that?
I tried to introduce that last year and it never got a hearing.
What about in the Senate?
I will introduce it in the Senate again. Yes, definitely.
So back to your 3 priorities of overreach from the federal government, transparency, and your third one is parental control for their family and classroom. So shifting to the classroom, the other related question was, should funding travel with the pupil? In other words, people being able to choose what school they go to. Your answer was yes, the Constitution requires an efficient system of public school, and you support the idea of free markets. Can you expound on that a little bit more and what you mean by parental control for their family?
Sure. Money should follow the child. Children should not follow the money. And that's really, unfortunately, how it is in the vast majority of school districts across the United States and Texas. Where children have the opportunity and parents have the opportunity, especially when we have failing schools. I serve on two committees, criminal jurisprudence and corrections. And you look at the demographics of kids that come through our prison system. These are kids that are born into poverty that cannot find a way out of poverty. Vast majority of them have dropped out of school by the time they're sophomores. In fact, Harold Dutton, a representative from Houston, will tell you that nearly 80% of the kids in his district, his house district in Houston, have dropped out of high school by the time they're sophomores. 80%. Vast majority of those kids will continue to live in poverty and wind up in prison. Just, a few hours away in New Orleans, where the school districts have failed there, they've passed legislation causing money to follow the child. And as a result of it, school districts, they took over the school district. The vast majority of the schools were closed, and dozens of small, independent schools, charter schools have popped up, and the dropout rates have dropped in half in those areas. We've got to do the same thing in Texas, and right now the biggest problem is House leadership will not allow it, because the special interest cartels of teachers' unions is blocking it.
Does that include following the children to parochial schools, to homeschooling?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The only issue I would have with homeschooling, and we homeschooled our kids, is that I don't want the state of Texas telling me how to homeschool my children. And if that's a condition on me taking state money to pay for my children's textbooks, I won't take it.
Okay. As you know, one of our members' mother uncovered C-scope, and they took it all the way to the state level to draw attention to that. You had you presented a bill, the C-scope Transparency Act, that was passed in the last legislative session, basically to shut this thing down. It's not quite there. Can you elaborate on the status of that, that it is still ongoing, and what you can do in the Senate to shut it down completely?
Right. So the initial piece of legislation that I offered, it not only called for C-scope, and C-scope is Common Core. Let's be clear on this. It's not just bad. It's not just weak. It has an agenda. It's Common Core, and it also has a very leftist agenda. For our children. And so we offered this bill, and what it did was it brought C-scope as well as any additional e-learning form under the auspices and the control, not just the oversight, not just the purview, which that's the problem with a lot of the language. You say, well, it's purview, therefore they have control. No, they don't. They have oversight, but it's teethless oversight. This would have given Barbara Cargill and the State Board of Education direct control over content of the material. So not does it teach the TEKS, not does it teach the TEKS well, but is it factually correct? Is it historically correct? And it would give them, they would be the ultimate authority on it. And it would not just be C-scope, it would be all e-learning. Unfortunately, the Senate version of the bill is the one that was adopted. And in my mind, it stopped short. And in the 84th legislative session in the Senate, I'm going to offer a new bill that won't be C-scope specific. It's just going to be any e-learning content. And I think this gets back to a much bigger thing, which is in the 81st legislative session, the 82nd legislative session, they cut the knees right out from underneath the State Board of Education with SB 6. And the State Board of Education needs to have the authority of being a filter within the state of Texas against garbage curriculum that's being fed into our schools.
Okay, thank you. Larry?
If you would give us an overview on gambling in the state of Texas and the funding source, and how we perceive it, the money's going, where it's going to fund education, and just elaborate on gambling.
Okay, so currently we have the lottery, and like many states, the lottery was sold to the general public on the condition that it would bring a limitless supply of education revenue to our public schools. And it has been anything but that. It is one of 200 different funding streams that come into the state of Texas. It's a dedicated fund, and very little of that money, very small amount of that money, it's around $50 million, actually goes into the classroom. It's very small. So what it is, it's a tax on the poor. If you look at the vast majority of advertising that's done by the Texas Lottery Commission, it's done and aimed at poor people You don't see any advertisements in the Woodlands or the surrounding area trying to get people that live in Carlton Woods to participate in a dollar and a dream or a scratch-off thing. They go towards inner-city poor people. And it's, in my mind, it's a tax. It's a tax on the poor, and many of these people are already on federal and state assistance with federal and state dollars, Medicaid, Medicare, food stamp dollars, and we ought not be doing it. It does not save the state. It does not make the state anything. As far as the idea of expanding gambling in the state of Texas, again, I believe it's a mistake. There's a liberty issue of you being able to do what you want to do with your own money in your own home. I understand that. But what this is about, it's typically about these cartels, these multinational corporations that come in and set these casinos up. Make no mistake, this is going to be about the thing of free market and being able to open up a casino on every corner. This is going to be about 2 or 3 licenses being given across the state of Texas. They will be run by multinational corporations, and the money, as soon as it goes into the casino, it will go to another country. It will not stay here in Texas.
How do we, I don't understand how they could tell us that all that money is going to be given to the education fund that's accumulated from the lottery. But in fact, as you just said, it's not. How does that happen? I just don't understand.
It's deception of government. It's the deception of government. It's the lack of transparency. And it needs to stop.
All right. So in your questionnaire, you said that you would be against the franchise tax, and we could eliminate that, and if we prioritize our budget, we'd be set. You also mentioned that you'd be against the property tax. Now, the property tax largely goes to independent school districts and county government. They may not be so happy about seeing the property tax abolished and not being able to replace it with anything. So, in your mind, what is the best way to raise the revenue for these agencies?
It's through sales tax, and there is a district. I visited a district just about a month ago that's here in Texas. Has no property tax. They also have no debt whatsoever, and they're a thriving pay-as-you-go community. Why? It's Stafford, Texas. Why? Because they have a city mayor that looks at his budget, and even once, first off, they zero-base budget every single year. So every single department has to come up with a valid reason for every single dollar that they spend. Once the budget is approved, they then are not allowed to spend the money whenever they want to. They just can't shoot it and spend it all day one. They have to come back actually on a month-by-month basis and request permission to spend money that particular month. And the city manager, the comptroller, and the mayor then decide based on the revenue that's coming in. Guys, it's just like running a business. I mean, this is how you would run a business, right? If you're going to say, hey, we're going to spend $1 million in this area, you can't spend it day one, can you? You don't have the ability. Cash flow just isn't there. Well, revenue that's generated from tax revenue, whether it's sales tax or property tax, it comes in at certain times of the year. I just had the opportunity to hear the Mayor Gonzalez of a small town south of San Antonio. This is nearly 80% Hispanic community. They just incorporated about 3 years ago, and they have cut their property taxes almost 70% in the last 3 years. Within 2 years, they will be property tax free. They have completely eliminated the regulations for businesses to exist in their community. As a result of it, businesses are coming to their community in droves. And by the way, this guy's a Republican in an 80% Hispanic area. He's a Republican mayor. And businesses are coming there in droves, and within 2 to 3 years, they will have no property taxes. It can be done. You're going to have slightly higher sales tax, but at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do. You look at a lot of elderly couples that are on fixed incomes. These are the people that these exorbitant property taxes are hurting the worst.
Do you know what the sales tax is in Stafford?
It's no higher than 8.25%. So, here's the deal: to do this statewide, the sales tax rate would have to rise. The state level would have to rise some, but not that much. What it would require is much greater depth of discipline on the part of local government to do it.
We've gone 30 minutes on questions and answers.
Okay, so we've got,
Really about 34 minutes we've got.
so we got 10 more minutes of questions, 5 minutes closing. Dale?
Okay, Representative Toth, you have stated that if the laws on the books are strongly enforced and taxpayer dollars were not issued to support undocumented or illegal aliens, then illegal aliens would mostly self-deport. And I believe that that's a correct statement. The problem, as I see it, is these benefits largely are mandated from federal government laws, and so this ties into federal pushback. For instance, free education, free health care. We're not allowed to verify that whether these are legal aliens or illegal aliens. So how do you resolve that? How do you effectively stop the benefits when a lot of it is required by federal law?
First off, getting back to one of the things you said early in your opening statement was they'll self-deport. We found that when the economy went sour in 2008, millions of them did self-deport. So we know that it works. We know that if the jobs aren't here, they won't stay, number one. Number two, if the benefits aren't here, they won't stay. This is an opportunity, I believe, for the church, not just here in Texas, but in Mexico. And it's going to require work between our government at the federal level and the Mexican government to ensure that border communities in Mexico are safe, so that church workers can go across the border. We need to help Mexico in Mexico. We need to help Mexico turn around with. There are a lot of parachurch ministries that want to go over there. I've been over there on several missions trips, building houses, doing different things. And there is an opportunity to help those people help themselves so they can turn their own state around. And that's, if we want to keep people from coming across the border, we need not only to secure the border, but we need to give them a reason to stay there. And I think that we can do that. Right now, you've got a problem too with undocumented people coming across the border every day for school. In Allen, Texas, a lot of places along the border, they're coming right across the border, right across the bridge. They're not being made to show IDs. Nothing. They come over, come to school, and they go back home at night. Women are doing the same thing. 58% of the babies born in Texas are Medicaid births. 2.5% of our budget was Medicaid 15 years ago. Today it's 23%. In the 84th legislative session, we'll spend more money on Medicaid than we do educating our children. Again, 58% of those births, Medicaid births, and you've got women that come across the border just to have their babies.
Okay.
Well, and if I can follow up just a little bit with that, a lot of what I hear is that they're actually fleeing the drug cartels and the dangers of their native country. Now, that's a little bit more difficult problem for us to solve, and so it still comes back to the issue of withholding benefits.
It does. It absolutely does. But again, what it comes down to is at the federal level, the federal government needs to make sure that the border is secure. And if they won't secure the border, we need to secure the border. And we need to work with at the federal level, we need to ensure that the federale in Mexico are making border communities safe and livable.
So this last November, we had a list of statewide amendments. One of them was Prop 6, which took was it 6? I think
$2 billion.
$2 billion out of the emergency fund to fund water projects throughout the state. Did you support or oppose that? And explain SWIFT and what your thinking is on that.
Okay, there were two two key votes on water that all led to Prop 6. One was HB2, which was the established basically an account for SWIFT, State Water Infrastructure Funding Tool, or for Texas, I think it is. And then SGR1, which was where the money would come from. I voted for HB2, which was to set up the account. SGR1 I voted against. That was to take money out of the Economic Stabilization Fund or the Rainy Day Fund. I thought it was criminal to take money out of the Rainy Day Fund for water or roads because two reasons. Number one, they're incredibly important, but number two, when we start the 83rd legislative session with an $8.8 billion surplus, there's no need. There's no reason. The reason why this was done is very simple. Politicians in Austin are trying to cripple the Rainy Day Fund. They're trying to cripple the Economic Stabilization Fund because it's too hard to work with. They don't want to have to go to you. They don't want to have to go to the voter to ask permission for spending money. And they can't raise vehicle registration fees and they can't raise gas taxes while there's $10 billion in the SF. So I voted against it. I really believe the right way to do it was to cut the budget just 2%. Across the board, it would have raised $1.98 billion. This was the Simmons Amendment. I supported it, and I think that's what we should have done.
Okay.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Let me go back to follow on to Dell's question about the border. What if the federals won't come in, and they haven't come in to secure the border? You said that Texas needs to step up and do that. Do we have the money to do it?
To secure the border?
Secure the border. And what is it going to take to do that?
I think we do have the money to do it. The Texas economy is growing faster than any economy in the United States right now. We're the 15th largest economy in the world. We go back and forth, 14 and 15 with Spain. We have the money to secure our border. And at the same time, too, I think we have the assets in place to have a much heavier-handed approach to people that violate our border. There's a documentary on TV about that shows the Texas border wars, or drug wars, and it's amazing to see the amount of restraint that goes on by DPS in the way that they handle people coming across the border. This is an armed invasion, and I went to a public safety briefing in January that was put on by DPS, and they said, they're bringing it up a notch. They're not only coming across the border with fully automatic weapons now, but we found hand grenades on these guys. I mean, they're bringing it to the next level. And yet, when there's interdiction, when there's a conflict at the border, with a helicopter as an example, I really believe we should be opening fire on these cars that are shooting at our police officers down below, and we're unwilling to do it. I think we've got to be willing to take it to the next level. When a guy gets out of his car and he's shooting at our DPS, we should be shooting back. And as long as you're on our side of the border, it's shoot first, ask questions later, if they're a threat to us or anybody here. So, and if they're unwilling to, if they're unwilling to surrender and they go across the border, I'd like to see us follow them.
One more question?
We talked a little bit about campus carry. What about open carry?
I support the legislation. I voted for the legislation. I have my CHL. I support it simply because it's the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment says shall not be infringed. And so that means to me, if you would like to open carry, you should have that right. I'm not going to open carry for the very simple reason that if there's a bad guy out there, I don't want him to know I'm carrying, because I'll be the first one that he shoots. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to open carry if I have the opportunity, but I want the right. I want the right that if I take my jacket off and I've got my gun out there, I don't have to worry about winding up in jail.
Okay. That concludes our 45 minutes of questionings, and now you, if you would like, take up to 5 minutes to do your closing.
Sure. Thanks for the time that y'all have put into this. I've worked really hard over the past year in the Texas legislature. You know, they say it's just a part-time gig. It's $600 a month, but it's absolutely been a full-time job, and I've loved traveling the state of Texas, learning more about what the issues are, serving on criminal jurisprudence and serving on corrections, as well as traveling around the state of Texas, helping other like-minded conservatives to get elected. I take this job very seriously, and I think we have an opportunity before us that it's a window. It's a small window, and it's going to close. Texas may turn blue in the coming years if we don't stand up and get really active and get really busy. I think the biggest issue that we have before us is the fact that most people don't see a difference anymore between Democrats and Republicans. And as a result of it, they stay home. They stay disengaged. They stay out of the process. And we've got to send people to Austin that will not just say that there's a difference, but actually live differently when they go to Austin and not become part of the problem. Austin is run by a special interest cartel. It is not government of, for, and by the people. I proved that. I voted that way when you sent me last year, and I'll continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good luck in your campaign.
Thank you.